Hello everybody, welcome to number 27, I'm Jack, and today I am here with this absolutely fantastic Lotus Esprit S1. A car that quite strangely in some circles has the reputation for being slower than a van. So today I'm going to talk to you about three things. First of all, some of the gadgets that the Bond version of this car had and the secrets of how they made them come to life for the film. Secondly, I'm going to take it for a drive and then we're going to find out, was it a car that was really worthy of 007 or was it really slower than a van? And then lastly, there is an incredible story about how the current owner got this car completely for free. So during the chase, we get to see one of the first gadgets on Bond's Esprit. This number plate flips up and it reveals 4 pipes. 2 of those pipes are used to devastating effect on a chasing Lotus Cortina, which is showered with concrete. The screen fills up, they can't see anything, and the car goes off the road and onto a poor farmer's little cabin. Now, one of the insider things about that, the way they achieved it, they did really spray stuff out the back of the car. It wasn't concrete though, it was grey oatmeal. The other 2 pipes were used later on when the car turns into a submarine to create the sort of octopus type oil slick for the people that were following. One of the next devastating weapons that we see is when the car has already turned into a submarine, it launches off a pontoon, goes into the water, and was being chased at the time by a helicopter. That helicopter is shot down. Bond has a surface-to-air missile. He lines it up inside the car, shoots, the missile pops up through the roof, goes up through the water and blows up the helicopter. So now I have to admit, when I saw that, I actually thought they'd genuinely blown up a helicopter because it looks quite convincing. And at the time, obviously, they didn't have CGI or computers or anything like that. But one of the little insider tips about that is that they cut quite cleverly in the film, if you notice the little cuts that they're doing. And when they cut to the last shot where it blows up, it is a radio control helicopter, 1/5 scale. But perhaps the most impressive trick of all is when the Esprit turns into a submarine. Now, they really did make a couple of prototypes that were functioning submarines. They were made by a company in Los Angeles, but those cars were not fully watertight at all. So what you saw on screen was a car which those strengthening bars on the screen were there to hide who was inside, because who was inside were 2 divers, full wetsuits, breathing gear, all the rest of it. That's also why in the film you see a lot of bubbles coming up from the car. They're basically from the divers. Now, in that filming, they also used some scale models. One of them you see, for example, when the car is shot from the pontoon, that is a car with an empty engine, it's basically a shell, which is shot 60 miles an hour from the pontoon, lands in the water, and then the next shot, underwater taking the car, that is of a model landing in the water. Now, for continuity, all the shots with the models also had to have bubbles, and in order to recreate that, they put some Alka-Seltzer tablets in all those models. And the scene where the car comes up from the beach, there is actually, they buried a cable under the beach, and that was pulling the car invisibly from behind. One last thing about this, which is quite interesting, is that I think there were 2 fully functional submersible models of the Esprit. One was bought in 2012 by Elon Musk at auction for about $200,000, $300,000, and that had been lost. So it had been put into storage into America in a storage locker, prepaid for 10 years. When that 10 years was up eventually, that was put to auction and someone bought it for $100 unseen. They didn't know what was in the storage unit. But enough of the gadgets, and let's take it for a drive. So the Esprit was launched in 1976, and quite oddly it was a replacement for the Lotus Europa. Quite a different car. You can see it comes from a completely different era. Giugiaro designed it and it looks absolutely amazing. It's from his origami style, and it is just an incredible looking thing. I think it's such a seminal design. One of the things that they were sort of criticised for was being a bit underpowered. It's got the Lotus twin cam engine, which a lot of people think is Ford derived, but actually isn't. It is a bespoke Lotus design. It's a good little engine. In this car, it put out 160 horsepower in Europe and 140 in US emissions trim. And the car weighs just under 1,000 kilos, so it's not too bad. But I suppose that when you compare it to what similar cars are doing at the time, so a 308 was supposed to have 250 horsepower, it didn't really, but it was supposed to, it had maybe 220, 230, then you can see why some people might have said that this was a little bit underpowered. 0 to 60 officially was 6.8 seconds, I think, or 6.5 seconds, top speed 138 miles an hour. In reality, 0 to 60 was 8 seconds, and the top speed was 120 something, 124, 125 miles an hour. So in the Ferrari tradition, I think there was a bit of bluffing from Lotus as well. But these S1s are supposed to be incredible handling cars. So was it a worthy Bond car? Well, in the chase, we have first of all a Kawasaki 900, which is chasing this, and that would have been way quicker, but it was hobbled by a sidecar. I'll give you a little bit of an interesting thing about that sidecar as well. It's released in the end as a sort of missile that chases Bond. That sidecar in the film, the way they did it, they had a driver in the car itself. He pressed a button inside, he was reclined, and the nose was translucent, but with a bit of a sort of a black smoky tint on it, so you couldn't see him. But there was someone in there, and that only did 20 miles an hour when released, so they sped it up for the movie. But anyway, that kind of bike would have been way quicker, but possibly definitely not as good in the corners and stopping. And one of the other interesting things is that the test driver who was supposed to drive this car found it too difficult. It was too grippy, so he couldn't get the kind of scenes that they needed for a Bond film. So the skidding, all that type of stuff. Now, Robert Becker, I think it was, who was the Lotus technician driver who delivered this car, had a go. At one point, he was supposed to help the stunt driver get used to the car. He had a go, and he was so good that in the end, he was the one that they got to film all the scenes. But it is quite telling that it was so grippy and it handled so well that the stunt driver couldn't quite get it to do what the film studios were hoping initially. These S1s are supposed to be the best driving of all the Esprits. They definitely have the least power, but they are supposed to be the nicest to drive. I owned a turbo, a 1984, an S3, and although there are some familiarities with this does feel very different. The steering is much more delicate, much lighter, more feel, and it's a more neutral, more natural driving car than my turbo. And quite a nice thing, it does remind me a little bit of the Europa that I think you will see a few days from now. You have to see that car. That was such an amazing car to drive. And this is a bit like it. It just feels a bit bigger. You can really feel the mid-engine configuration and the way that it turns. And the suspension, true Lotus fashion, works really, really well on these roads. But certainly it doesn't feel like a very fast car. The Citroen gearbox that we have here is the same gearbox I had in my S3. Some people don't like them. I think that they're fantastic. It's quite a heavy gearbox, but it's quite precise. You have to know where the gears are, but once you do, it's got a nice mechanical feel to it. I always loved it in my S3, and in this, for some reason, maybe the car has more miles, 80,000 on the clock, it feels a little bit looser, not in a bad way, it's just a little bit nicer, lighter. So very nice. You can feel the twin cam burbling away behind you, and perhaps it's not as refined or as exotic as a V8, but it is still a nice little engine. Again, this just floats down this road. It's just brilliant. Brakes are okay. There's a bit of travel at the lever, but they do sort of stop you. Obviously I'm not doing mad speeds today, but they seem to work okay. There's a little bit of feel there. Now David, the owner, who really kindly brought this up to me today, didn't want me to rev it all the way through. I mean, he was fine about it, but he was just hinting, you know, I don't like to rev it too far and so on, and it is someone else's car, so I'm not going to do one of my usual pulls today where I go right to the red line with this, but you can kind of feel that there isn't much power there. It really isn't. It doesn't feel like a very quick car. It does make up for it with the handling though. It's so neutral, absolutely lovely, so neutral, so light, so well balanced, like most Lotuses, to be fair. So okay, it may not have a massive amount of poke, but it is at least really responsive. It's so hard to emulate nowadays with the fly-by-wire throttles and all the rest of it, but you feel a physical connection to that engine. Every little millimetre of travel on the throttle, it's quite a nice light throttle as well. Goes straight to, responds straight to the engine. It's got twin Delorto carbs, and it is very responsive. Now when Bond is being chased, he's being chased by a Cortina, and I had a look at that because I thought, you know, can this really be slower than a van? So a Cortina at the time would have been a 2-litre at least, or the top end version, the 2.2 V6. 2.2 V6 only had 105 horsepower, weighed about the same as this, maybe a bit more. So it definitely would have been a much slower car, whatever it was. So I think that this sort of myth that this was slower than a van, well, it is true. If you get to maybe to the mid-90s or something like that, a nice Transit would probably be a little bit quicker than this, frankly, coming out of roundabouts. Certainly wouldn't drive like this though. So was it worthy of being a Bond car? It absolutely was worthy of being a Bond car. It is another Lotus that is an absolutely fantastic drive, and which is more than the sum of its parts. This works, unlike the Europa actually, is very cohesive. All the controls work really well. The clutch is light, the throttle is light, the gearbox has a bit more weight to it, but it all works in sync together. Now there are some other interesting things about this car. I'll tell you in a moment how the owner got it for free, but before then, I really like the fact that he's kept it completely original. Now that means that there are definite signs of wear here. The seats are quite worn, some of the fabrics are worn, but you really feel like you're in the original one of the original Esprits. Bond's own car had a different interior. It had that tartan interior, which some people love. I do, some people don't. The current owner prefers this, but even this is just so 70s. It's absolutely fantastic. But anyway, David, who brought it to me, told me a story which I just couldn't believe. He bought this when he was 25, I think, second hand. He kept it for quite a while. It had a few little issues here and there, so he's had to upgrade the cooling, for example, which was something that Roger Moore said in filming in Sardinia. The car's kept overheating, so he's added an extra fan that he can switch on and off. But anyway, in '98 he decided to sell it, and a gent from Ireland picked it up and took it away. And he was, you know, he'd had the car for a long time, but obviously decided he was going to sell it, thought that would be the last of it. In 2004, the chap who bought it died. He passed away. And David got a call telling him that he had left him the car in his will. So isn't that just amazing? So he bought it from him. He knew the history that he had with this car. And when he died, he left it. And David got it back and has had it ever since. So he got it for free, but I just love that someone would do something like that and just say, you know what, I bought that car from this gent and he was so nice and he had it for so long that I'm going to put it and leave it for him in my will. I really hope you've enjoyed this little video today. It is definitely worthy of being a Bond car, maybe not the fastest. Thank you all so much for watching. If you've got an interesting car that you want me to review with an interesting story, then please let me know. Instagram is the best way. And really look forward to seeing you all again soon.